In the small town of Everwood, something truly extraordinary was about to happen, something that would defy all understanding of the natural world. As the sun began to set on a quiet afternoon, a strange visitor knocked at the door of the Everwood police station. But this wasn't just any visitor. It was an animal, large and intimidating, yet it wasn't there to attack. It had come with a message, and what happened next would leave the officers and everyone who heard the story forever changed. It was a typical Thursday afternoon in Everwood, a small town where the most exciting thing that usually happened was the occasional traffic stop or a lost pet. Officer Emily Hart sat behind the dispatch desk, casually sipping her coffee, her mind on the mundane. But she had no idea that today would soon change the course of her entire career. The knock came at precisely 4:37 p.m., a sharp, insistent sound that reverberated through the station like a drumbeat. It was not the usual knock of someone seeking help or information. This knock carried with it a heaviness, almost as if the visitor was desperate. Emily's hand froze mid-sip, the coffee cup nearly slipping from her fingers. She glanced up at the security monitor, expecting to see a person, maybe a local trying to get inside before the office closed for the day. But what she saw on the screen made her heart race. A massive animal stood outside the door, its silhouette enormous against the fading light. It was a bear. At first, Emily thought it might be a trick of the light, a shadow perhaps, but the bear raised its massive paw and knocked again. 3 times, distinct and deliberate. The weight of the situation began to sink in as Emily watched, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't normal. Bears didn't approach human structures like this, especially not in such an intentional manner. As if on instinct, she reached for the radio. "Officer Blake, we've got a situation outside. A bear, and it's knocking on the station door." The voice on the other end crackled through. "Say again, Emily. Did you say a bear?" Before Emily could respond, the bear knocked again, this time with a pattern. 3 quick knocks followed by 2 slow ones. It was almost rhythmic. The hairs on the back of Emily's neck stood on end. This wasn't just random behavior. The animal was trying to communicate. Confused but compelled by a deep sense of responsibility, Emily picked up the phone and dialed for backup. "Get everyone down here. We've got a bear behaving strangely outside, and I think it tried to tell us something." As she waited, her mind raced. What could be so urgent that a wild bear would seek out human help? And why was it knocking like this, looking into the camera with eyes that seemed to convey more than mere instinct? Emily couldn't explain it, but something told her this was no ordinary encounter. She could only hope that the others would arrive soon, and that they would understand the gravity of what was unfolding in front of them. The moments that followed felt like an eternity. Officer Blake arrived at the front entrance just as Emily watched the bear knock once more, its massive form standing tall on its hind legs. It was as if the creature understood the urgency, its movements calculated, deliberate. Every knock felt like a plea. Each pause between them waited with expectation. "Is that really a bear?" Officer Blake asked, staring at the security feed in disbelief. Emily could only nod. "Yeah, and it's not just any bear. I've never seen anything like this before." The bear lowered itself back down onto all fours, then circled the entrance, pausing every few moments to look directly into the camera as though it was waiting for something. Its gaze was unblinking, unwavering. The officers, now gathered around the monitor, watched in stunned silence. "I've seen bears before, but they usually run off when they spot humans," Blake continued. "This one, it's different." Emily's heart raced. She'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize a situation that wasn't just odd, it was unnatural. Bears didn't behave like this. Not only was it knocking, but its body language was calm, almost pleading. It was clear this bear wasn't just lost or looking for food. It had a purpose, and that purpose was quickly becoming impossible to ignore. Just then, Officer Jenkins, a veteran of the department, arrived on the scene, and his eyes immediately locked onto the security feed. He stood still for a moment, taking in the surreal sight of the bear, its eyes, its deliberate movements. "That bear's trying to tell us something," Jenkins said, his voice low, as though speaking aloud might make the reality of the situation more tangible. "This isn't normal. This is something else. Emily, still processing the bizarre scenario, turned to the radio. Dispatch, we got a situation here. Officer Jenkins, Blake, and I are heading out. Get wildlife on the line and alert the team. As the officers moved toward the door, the bear knocked again, but this time it was different. There was an urgency to the knock, an almost frantic desperation. 3 sharp raps, then a pause, then 2 slower knocks, followed by another long gaze into the camera. The pattern was becoming clearer with every visit, each sequence more defined than the last. When they stepped outside, the air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the heavy stillness of the late afternoon clinging to everything. The bear was waiting at a distance, standing tall once again on its hind legs, its gaze never wavering from the officers. "All right, we'll approach cautiously," Emily instructed, her voice steady despite the rising tension in her chest. "This isn't a typical wildlife encounter. We have to assume it's not acting out of instinct, but purpose." They moved forward slowly, keeping their distance, watching the bear's every movement. The creature didn't retreat. It waited. Then, just as they reached the edge of the parking lot, the bear began to move again, its massive form loping toward the forest. It paused every few yards, turning its head to make sure the officers were following. It was as if it knew they were coming, and it was leading them somewhere. "Is it leading us?" Blake asked, a mix of awe and disbelief in his voice. "It's more like guiding us," Emily said, her eyes narrowing. "This bear isn't just roaming. It's trying to tell us something, and I'm starting to think it knows we're the only ones who can help. But what was it trying to say, and why?" The officers exchanged uncertain glances, the growing realization that they were part of something bigger than themselves settling in. Something extraordinary, something beyond their comprehension. They followed the bear deeper into the forest, the air growing cooler as the trees thickened around them. The bear never moved too far ahead. It seemed to pause every few steps, making sure they were keeping up. Each glance it cast back at them was purposeful, as if it was saying, "Come on, we're almost there." And yet, despite the strange calmness of the bear's actions, there was a growing sense of urgency in its every movement. The officers quickened their pace, instinctively knowing that time was running out. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to wait. The further they ventured into the woods, the more profound the feeling that they were being guided by something ancient, something beyond the wild instincts they were used to. The forest was thick with the scent of moss and damp leaves, the path narrowing as they descended into a hidden ravine. The bear, Martha as they had begun calling her, was always just ahead, moving with a surety that seemed to suggest a familiarity with the land. It paused occasionally to glance back at the officers, its eyes now conveying something even deeper than urgency, something that seemed like trust. Emily couldn't help but notice how careful the bear was with its movements. Despite the rugged terrain, the bear seemed to know exactly where to step. There was a certain grace to her actions, a calculated care that the officers couldn't ignore. This wasn't a typical bear. It wasn't just surviving. It was moving with purpose, as though leading them to something important. The air in the ravine grew heavier as the minutes passed, and the sound of running water started to fill the air. The officers, cautious but intrigued, continued to follow. They hadn't spoken much, the weight of what was happening settling heavily in their minds. No one had ever seen a bear act this way, and no one could quite explain what was happening. "Do you think she's trying to warn us about something?" Blake's voice broke the silence, his words carrying a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Emily nodded. "I think she's showing us something. I don't know what yet, but I don't think it's just random." The bear's steady pace did not falter. It moved with purpose, her eyes continuously checking the officers behind her, making sure they were keeping up. The officers had begun to feel a sense of connection with her, even though the logic of it was still elusive. How could an animal like this, wild, untamed, driven by primal instinct, be so deliberate? It didn't make sense. As they approached a rocky outcrop, the ground beneath their feet grew slippery, and Emily instinctively steadied herself. Just as she did, she noticed something odd. Footprints, but not just any footprints. They were too large for a human, and the shape was all wrong for a bear's usual tracks. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she bent down to inspect them. "Do you see this?" she asked, her voice tight with caution. Blake crouched beside her, his face grim. "These are fresh. They lead up toward the ravine." The tracks, muddy and damp from the recent rainfall, continued toward the edge of the ravine where the sound of rushing water was becoming more distinct. The trail seemed to have been disturbed recently. The earth around it showing signs of desperate movement, scratches on the rock, broken branches, and marks that suggested someone, or something, had been in a hurry. The bear, Martha, was now pacing ahead, her behavior becoming more agitated. She would glance back, her eyes now frantic, as though urging them to hurry. Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she realized that this wasn't just a walk through the woods. Something was wrong. Something was happening, and they were on the brink of discovering what it was. "Keep moving," Sergeant Jenkins commanded quietly, his tone sharp with the urgency that was now palpable in the air. The team's pace quickened, and they followed the bear as it continued down the narrow, treacherous path. The ground grew more unstable, but the bear seemed to have no trouble navigating it, her body flowing with the terrain, her steps sure and light. They rounded a bend, and the ravine opened up before them, a steep drop leading to a dark, still pool at the bottom. The water here was unusually deep, the color murky, and the air heavy with moisture. But what caught Emily's attention wasn't the water. It was the sign of something else, something even more alarming. A piece of fabric, torn and matted with mud, lay tangled in the brush near the edge of the ravine. The fabric was familiar. "That's a backpack strap," Blake said, his voice trembling slightly as he bent to pick it up. He held it up for the others to see. This wasn't just an animal passing through. The realization hit them like a wave. The bear wasn't leading them on some random wander through the woods. No, this was deliberate. The bear was showing them something it had been trying to communicate for what felt like hours. As the officers gathered around the fabric, their minds raced. "What's going on, Emily?" Jenkins asked, his voice low with tension. What could have happened here? Emily shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know, but I think we're getting closer. That bear is trying to show us something. Whatever's happened here, it's not good." The bear was now waiting at the edge of the ravine, her eyes fixated on the same point in the distance. The officers moved closer, following her gaze as they peered down into the shadows. What they saw next would be burned into their memories forever. The officers moved cautiously toward the edge of the ravine, their hearts racing in sync with the rising tension in the air. The bear, Martha, was still there, standing at the precipice as if it were waiting for them to understand something important. Her eyes remained fixed on the shadowed depths below, her posture tense with an almost human-like anticipation. Emily's pulse quickened as her gaze followed the bear's. At first, it was hard to make sense of what lay below in the dimming light. The steep rocks formed jagged cliffs that descended into the darkness of the ravine, with the water rushing below, carrying the echo of its flow through the deep, narrow channel. But it was the scattered items along the edge of the ravine that drew her attention. Hiking gear, wet, muddy, and torn, lay strewn across the rocky ground. A backpack strap, a water bottle, a first aid kit, and, most disturbingly, pieces of fabric that matched the scraps the bear had brought back to the station. Then, Emily's flashlight swept over something that made her breath catch. There, wedged between two large rocks, she saw what looked like a pair of hiking boots. But they were positioned at an unnatural angle. It was clear now that whoever had been here was in trouble. "Stay back," Sergeant Jenkins ordered softly, his eyes narrowing as he studied the scene. "We need to assess this carefully." They moved forward, their movements slow and deliberate. The bear, as if understanding their caution, stepped back slightly, allowing them to approach. The closer they got, the more apparent it became that someone had fallen or been caught. The jagged rock below formed a dangerous terrain, and the items scattered around the ravine painted a grim picture. Emily's eyes scanned the area below, and it was then she saw him. There, lying partially submerged in the shallow pool at the bottom of the ravine, was a man, his silver hair matted with blood, his body twisted unnaturally beneath a fallen log. His leg was trapped, wedged between the heavy wood and a sharp rock. The sight stopped them all in their tracks. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, the horror of the discovery sinking in. The man was conscious, though barely. His shallow, labored breathing was the only sign that he was still alive. His face was pale, and his body was clearly battered from the fall and the subsequent entrapment. Blake's voice trembled as he spoke. Is he still alive?" "I don't know," Emily replied, her eyes locked on the man's face. "But we need to get down there. Now." Sergeant Jenkins immediately called for backup on the radio. "We've got a rescue situation. A man is trapped in the ravine, badly injured. Get a team ready to assist us." As the team began their preparations for the descent, the bear, Martha, moved slowly toward the ravine's edge once more, her gaze shifting from the injured man to the officers. Her body language had shifted too. Where once there was urgency, now there was something else. It was almost as if she was watching them with hope, as if she were waiting for them to act. "Do you think she's the one who found him?" Blake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily looked at the bear, then back at the man. She could feel the weight of the situation growing heavier with each passing moment. "I think she's the one who's been trying to tell us about him. She's been bringing us the clues, the fabric, the backpack strap. This isn't just random. She's been trying to get us to come." It was then that Emily noticed something that made her stomach churn. The backpack strap they had found earlier, so similar to the torn fabric from the bear's earlier visits, now revealed more. There were food wrappers inside, animal treats that would be familiar to a bear. The realization hit her like a cold wave. "This man," Emily murmured, her voice tight. "He's been feeding her. He knows this bear. He's been helping her all along." Blake's eyes widened. "You think this is Martha's human? The one she's been coming for?" Emily nodded, her mind racing. It made sense now. This wasn't a random act of wildlife behavior. Martha wasn't just looking for help. She was trying to save someone she cared about. The man's name, she realized, had to be something they hadn't noticed earlier. The label on the backpack, still partially visible, had the name James Wilson printed in faded letters. That name seemed to haunt Emily as she understood the connection between Martha and the man. "James Wilson," Emily whispered. "He's a wildlife photographer. He must be the one who's been photographing Martha and other bears in the area. He's been feeding her since she was a cub. This is his bear." At that moment, everything clicked into place. The bear's behavior, the repeated visits, the communication, it wasn't just instinct. It was a bond, a relationship built over years. A relationship so strong that Martha was willing to risk everything to save the life of the man who had cared for her all this time. Martha, now standing near the edge of the ravine, let out a soft whimper. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. She was in distress. Emily and the team exchanged looks. This wasn't just a bear leading them to a man in danger. This was a desperate plea for help from an animal who understood the value of human connection better than most. "We need to move quickly," Sergeant Jenkins said, his voice strained but determined. "Get the rescue equipment ready. We're going in." The officers, their hearts heavy with the gravity of the situation, began to descend into the ravine. The bear remained at the top, watching them with a mixture of caution and trust, as though she knew they were her last hope. And as they began to work their way down to James Wilson, Martha let out another, longer whimper, one that seemed to carry not only hope but an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time, the officers realized that the bond between Martha and this man went far beyond what they had ever imagined. As the officers carefully lowered themselves into the ravine, the sound of Martha's soft whimpers echoed in the still air. She watched from the edge, her large, intelligent eyes never leaving James Wilson, who lay unconscious, his body still and fragile. Emily reached the trapped man first, her heart pounding in her chest. He was alive, barely, but his injuries were severe. The fallen log had pinned his leg in an unnatural position, and it was clear that he had been trapped here for hours, possibly longer. "Stay with him," Emily urged, as the others began securing the rescue gear. Her voice was steady, but inside, the weight of the situation was overwhelming. The realization of the bond between Martha and James, the connection they shared, only made the task more urgent. James stirred slightly as Emily checked for a pulse. "James," she whispered, her voice gentle but firm. "Can you hear me?" He blinked, his eyes fluttering open, and a faint smile crossed his bloodied lips. "Martha," he muttered weakly, his voice hoarse. She came for me." Emily's throat tightened. "We're here to help you, James. We're going to get you out." Above them, the bear stood like a sentinel, waiting patiently, her eyes full of an almost human-like understanding. She didn't move, she didn't make a sound. She simply watched, as though knowing her part in this story was nearing its end. The rescue team worked quickly, cutting away the debris and carefully stabilizing James. As they hoisted him to safety, the bear remained, her gaze never straying from them. Emily felt a deep, emotional weight settle in her chest as they pulled James to the top of the ravine. It was then that Martha made her final, heartbreaking gesture. She took one last look at James, her eyes full of gratitude, and slowly turned to disappear into the woods. As the team loaded James onto a stretcher, the silence between them was profound. The officers, so used to dealing with human emergencies, had never encountered anything like this. The raw, unspoken connection between the bear and the man, the lengths to which the animal had gone to save his life, left them all deeply shaken. James was airlifted to the hospital, and as the officers watched him go, they felt something they hadn't expected, a profound sense of awe and a newfound respect for the natural world. For Emily, Sergeant Jenkins, and the rest of the team, this experience had shattered everything they thought they knew about animals and compassion. It wasn't just the extraordinary bond between Martha and James that left them in awe. It was a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely heroes come from the places we least expect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the officers stood in quiet reflection, each of them forever changed by the incredible events that had unfolded. They would never forget the bear who had knocked on their door, not just to seek help, but to show them the true meaning of loyalty, compassion, and the deep connections that exist between species. And somewhere deep in the forest, Martha the bear disappeared, knowing that her mission had been accomplished.